Those who can smile in trouble, gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. 'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but they whose heart is firm and whose conscience approves their conduct will pursue their principles unto death. That's a quote by Leonardo da Vinci. When you serve on a team, even if the performance, whether it's good or bad, positive or negative, you can use the power of reflection to learn from that and grow and improve your team's performance. Have any of you been on a team that initially performed poorly and then was able to do better after reflecting? Has that ever happened to any of you? Good, okay. It's possible to completely turn that team's performance around. I'm going to describe this principle a little bit. I'll share with you some research that was done about it, and I'm going to give you 2 real-life examples that will demonstrate this process in action. So what is this all about? Reflection. It's about taking a look at what your team has done, as well as thinking about what they have to do, and making some changes in there so that you'll perform better. Let me just go through this a little more specifically. You have the initial performance. Then you engage in a process. It's a reflection process. What do you reflect on? Everything. You look at your strategies and your decision making, your objectives. You look at your communication processes and your relationships. You take a look at what actions you've taken and you plan for future action. This reflection process allows you to learn from that. And then the team will dramatically improve their performance. That's the plan. There was some research that was done on 73 different types of teams. And this study showed that even if a team had poor performance, low performance initially, when they engaged in this process of reflection and they learned new approaches and tried it again, there was a real boost in their team's performance. So this has been validated through research. If you don't have a penchant for research, I'm going to share with you some real-life examples. This first example is about a team that formed not by design, but by circumstances. What happened was, crash! A plane crash. Maybe I didn't do that very good, but anyway, hope I got your attention. This was Flight 571 that crashed in the Andes Mountains on October 13th, 1972. There were 40 people on board, and in the end there were 16 survivors. The Andes Mountains is a very harsh, hostile place. It was 40 degrees below zero temperature there. The snow was 60 feet high in that area at that time. There were 3 different countries that sent out planes to look for them. The plane was white, it blended in with the snow, so it was really just impossible situation. Now, another thing I want you to think about is about the people that were on that plane. A lot of them were rugby players. They were not outdoorsmen. They didn't have any kind of skill in surviving in a situation like this. They didn't have medical supplies or other supplies or equipment or food or anything that they needed. After many days of virtually nothing to eat, they came up with a novel plan about a food source. But even so, they still rationed the food. What happened on the 11th day was really a defining moment They could hear on the transistor radio that the search was called off. There was an extreme cloud of doom that came over them. Not everyone bought into this hopelessness. There was a young man named Nicolake, and he ran in and he says, I just heard on the radio some good news. The search has been called off. Another guy says, well, why the hell is that good news? And he says, because that means we're going to get out of here on our own. And that's what they did. The way they did it really was through the power, using this power of reflection. I should tell you something else, and that is that there was not any one person on this team that survived that had all the skills. It was really a team effort that made this possible. They made some initial trial expeditions to try to get out of the situation. And what happened was they experienced altitude sickness, dehydration, they almost completely froze to death, and snow blindness. They knew they had to address these issues, and they did it by reflecting on what they needed to do to change this. During one of these trial expeditions, they came across the tail section of the airplane. In there were some bats of insulation. In one of their brainstorming sessions, they said, okay, what we'll do is we'll sew those together. There was a young man named Paez, and his mother taught him sewing, so he learned how to do that. So they all, 3 people, he taught how to sew so that they could put this all together. So they had a sleeping bag. They crafted some goggles out of the airplane sun visor. They jerry-rigged some strips of aluminum to put the snow into a bottle, because they could not just eat the snow directly or they would get hypothermia. Then finally they set out on their expedition. They had to go up over the mountains to the west where it was extremely cold. And one day they made it down into a valley, and there was a river and a man on a donkey on the other side, and they got his attention. At that point they knew they would be saved. This second example is it's loosely based on what happened at Procter & Gamble when there was a consulting team that went in to help improve things. But in this story, it's called Consolidated. What happened was this consulting team had done some work for them, and they produced the standard market analysis, projections, and recommendations, but just nothing really dazzled them. So this consulting team is going back to the drawing board to figure out what can we do to make this client happy. So they went back, and what happened, the real block was one of the team members, his name was Juan. He was stuck in a certain view, and he just could not see things in a different way. One of his team members, Kate, was slightly senior to him. She invited him to meet with her before the overall team meeting one day. And she had him to put information that he already had this in his database, had him put that up on a whiteboard, and she asked him pertinent questions like, what do we know about the products, the market share, and the customers, and create really a mind map, a visual display. That helped them to really reflect about this information. They brought in the whole team, and they really delved into it deeply. And this helped them to help that client to dramatically reduce their cost, make their employees happy, and also make the customers happy, happier than they had been in decades. You can use the power of reflection to transform a losing team into a winning team. In reflection, take a look at what you've done in the past. Think about what you need to do in the future. And through a learning process, you can make improvements and have dramatically better performance.